FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Let's talk for a second about this very big shift that we are seeing. Just as a reminder, when I was a young banker, one of the first things I had to do was write a study on recycling petrodollars. I could do that again today. And I went to the head of the trust department of Bankers Trust at the time and asked him about whether it was a good idea to, look at markets and create an investment capability overseas. And he had these big red suspenders and he snarled at me and said, "There are no markets outside the United States." Now, of course, that was an exaggeration already at that time, but it just gives you a sense of how things have changed. Then in 1981, as Brian said, I coined this word emerging markets to give it a bit of a lift. Third world didn't sound very good to invest in, and people thought of these countries as basically crazy casinos, very poor countries, certainly not places you put pension fund money in. That was just insane. Well, if you hadn't done it in the last 4 years, you wouldn't have made 37% per year. So it wasn't as insane as it looked. Then in 88, when we started our firm, and I think Hilda and Mike are here, who started the firm. We started the firm together, and it at that time. Remember, Russia and China were still communist countries. India was a socialist country. Brazil, frankly, was a mess. Had a couple of 1,000% inflation. Now, fast forward to today. Today, if you look at it, 75% of our Treasury bills are held by China. In other words, if you go to the bank and get a mortgage loan, say thank you to China because they keep the interest rates low. Korea, which just 8 years ago was a basket case, today has 3 times the reserves of the IMF. In fact, the IMF and the World Bank, important as they are no longer lending at the moment, taking the money back, because there is so much money. That is this shift that is taking place. China is a bigger importer into the U.S. and into Europe than Japan. Those are the changes. Gazprom in Russia, you have heard of, provides 20% of the energy for Europe. Europe is very dependent on it. In other words, you see how we are becoming, instead of dominant, more dependent. Tom Friedman said, the world is flat. I actually think the world is tilting toward emerging markets. Because if we now fast forward 25 years from now, and I can imagine that it is very hard to see this yet, but 25 years from now, emerging markets as a group will have economies that are larger than the developed countries, the United States, Europe, Japan, together. In fact, in 50 years, that's in the middle of the emerging market century, they will be twice as large. It is hard to imagine that it's not the US, but China that will be the anchor economy of the world. These are monumental changes. And I believe that we have 2 choices. We can either be like the aristocrats of the 19th century, who saw the Industrial Revolution and poo-pooed it, and who saw the emerging middle class at the time and didn't take them seriously, which was a classic mistake. A denial, or we can say, instead of this just being a brutal shock, this is actually a very exciting opportunity.